Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Would You Read It Challenge video for September 2023. The Would You Read It Challenge was started by Et2 Brody, and I'll link to their information down below. The point of this tag was to read the first sentence of a variety of books that you choose however you want to, and then ask your audience if you'd like to continue reading the book, like what they think of it. I always thought a sentence is too little to make that distinction from or decision from, and I've gone to a paragraph or two for the books I use. And I have been using the BookTube prize to look back at yesteryear and see if what I and what you might think of the books in contention. So the BookTube Prize was started by Robert at Barter Hordes. It's a way for the literary book community to judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction published the year before in the US. We are currently, for the 2023 year, in the finals round, and the winners and runners-up will be announced in just a couple of weeks. And I'm not really allowed to talk about anything I'm officially reading as a judge, but there's been a couple of years of BookTube prizing behind me. And when it comes to each division, fiction and nonfiction, each year we start with 48 books, so that's a lot of books to consider. And I've just been going through sequentially, and today I'm here to talk about and consider the books that were on the 2020 ballot in Group D. And by the ballot, I mean the long list, the first long list, the Octafinals long list. Group D. There are 6 books in this ballot. I have read 2 of them, and I think my opinions are not controversial necessarily, but don't match with popular opinion. But we will get to all of that. Just to start with now, I will just share, the first couple paragraphs with you, and then the titles, and then my thoughts. Okay, so I'm starting with book number 1. But that afternoon there was an orchestra playing. Music filling the brownstone, black fingers pulling violin bows and strumming cellos, dark lips around horns, a small brown girl with pale pink nails on a flute, Malcolm's younger brother, his dark skin glistening, blowing somberly into a harmonica, a broad-shouldered woman on a harp. From my place on the stairs, I could see through the windows curious white people stopping in front of the building to listen. And as I descended, the music grew softer, the lyrics inside my head becoming a whisper. I know a girl named Nikki. I guess you could say she was a sex fiend. No vocalist. The little girl didn't know the words. The broad-shouldered woman, having once belted them out loud while showering, was now saved and refused to remember them. Iris wouldn't allow them to be sung, and Malcolm's brother's sweet 7-year-old mouth was full. Still, they moved through my head as though Prince himself were beside me. I met her in a hotel lobby, masturbating with a magazine. And that was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. And that is also not the first explicit sexual reference from in this video, so don't hate me, YouTube. Anyway, on to book number 2. First Incantation. Obasa Dinelu. I stand before you here in the magnificent court of Bechuqu, in El Wigwe, the land of eternal, luminous light, where the perpetual song of the flute serenades the air. Like other guardian spirits, I have gone to Uwa in many cycles of reincarnations, inhabiting a freshly created body each time. I have come in haste, soaring untrammeled like a spear through the immense tracts of the universe, because my message is urgent, a matter of life and death. I stand knowing that a chi is supposed to testify before you, if his host is dead, and his host's soul has ascended into Benmuo, that liminal space crowded with spirits and discarnate beings of every hue and scale. It is only then that you request that guardian spirits come to your dwelling place, this grand celestial court, and ask you to grant the souls of our hosts safe passage into Alandichi, the habitation of the ancestors. And that was from An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma. Book 3. Dead Papa Toothwort wakes from his standing nap an acre wide and scrapes off dream dregs of bitumen, glistening thick with liquid globs of litter. He lies down to hear hymns of the earth, there are none, so he hums, Then he shrinks and cuts himself a mouth with a rusted ring pool, and sucks up a wet skin of acid-rich mulch and fruity detritivores. He spits and wobbles, divides and reassembles, coughs up a plastic pot and a petrified condom, briefly pauses as a smashed fiberglass bath, stumbles and rips off the mask, feels his face and finds it made of long-buried tannic acid bottles. Victorian rubbish. Tetchy Papa Toothwort should never sleep in the afternoon. He doesn't know who he is. And that was from Lanny by Max Porter. Book 4, and I should mention this is where the rest of the sexual explicitness comes in. Toby Fleischman awoke one morning inside the city he'd lived in all his adult life, and which was somehow suddenly now crawling with women who wanted him. Not just any women, but women who were self-actualized and independent and knew what they wanted. Women who weren't needy or insecure or self-doubting, like the long-ago prospects of his long-gone youth, meaning the women he had thought of as his prospects, but who had never given him even a first glance. No, these were women who were motivated and available and interesting and interested and exciting and excited. These were women who would not so much as wait for you to call them 1 or 2 or 3 socially acceptable days after you met them, as much as send you pictures of their genitals the day before. Women who were open-minded and up for anything and vocal about their desires and needs, and who used phrases like, "put my cards on the table," and "no strings attached," and "I need to be done in 10 because I have to pick up Bella from ballet." Women who would fuck you like they owed you money, was how our friend Seth put it. Yes, who could have predicted that Toby Fleischman, at the age of 41, would find that his phone was aglow from sunup to sundown, in the night the glow was extra bright, with texts that contained G-string and ass cleavage and underboob and side boob and just straight up boob, and all the parts of a woman he never dared dream he would encounter in a person who was three-dimensional, meaning literally three-dimensional, as in a person who wasn't on a page or a computer screen. All this after a youth full of romantic rejection. All this after putting a lifetime bet on one woman. Who could have predicted this? Who could have predicted there was such life in him yet? That was from Fleischman is in Trouble by Taffy Brodesser Ackner. Book 5. The Driven Snow. They were still youngsters that winter. They lost their baby sister before the first snowfall. Their mother laid the infant in a shallow trough beside the only other grave in the cove, and she sang the lullaby she'd sung all her children to sleep with, which was as much as they had to offer of ceremony. The woman was deathly sick herself by then, coughing up clots of blood into her hands. The ground was frozen solid when she died, and even if their father had been well enough to shovel, there was no digging a grave for her. He and Everard shifted the covering of reeds and alders away from the overturned boat, and hauled it down to the landwash before they carried the corpse from the house. They set it in the boat along with 6 stones scavenged along the shore. Their father slumped against the gunwale to catch his breath. "Will I come out with you?" Everard asked. He shook his head. "You stay with your sister," he said. The youngsters watched him row away from shore and out beyond the shoal water with his dead wife. They saw him leaning below the gunwales for what seemed like a long time, his head and shoulders bobbing up now and then. He was working at something awkward and unpleasant, it seemed, though neither could guess what it was. They watched him wrestling the weight of the corpse with his back to the shore. He was far enough off they couldn't see that their mother was naked when she tipped into the black water of the ocean. And that was from The Innocents by Michael Crummy. And finally, Book 6. And I could have only seen her there on the stone bridge, a dancer wreathed in ghostly blue, because that was the way they would have taken her back when I was young, back when the Virginia earth was still red as brick and red with life. And though there were other rivers spanning the River Goose, they would have bound her and brought her across this one, because this was the bridge that fed into the turnpike that twisted its way through the green hills and down the valley, before bending in one direction, and that direction was south. I had always avoided that bridge, for it was stained with the remembrance of mothers, uncles, and cousins gone. Notch's way. But knowing now that awesome power of memory, how it can open a blue door from one world into another, how it can move us from mountains to meadows, from green woods to fields caked in snow, knowing now that memory can fold the lake like cloth and knowing too how I had pushed my memory of her into the down there of my mind, how I forgot but did not forget. I know now this story, this conduction, had to begin there on that fantastic bridge between the land of the living and the land of the lost. And that was from The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Okay, so I guess I'll start with the two books I've read. The first book I'll talk about is the one I read because it was on the finals list in 2020 for fiction, and that is Lanny by Max Porter. And I was not as fond of this book as a lot of other people. I probably wouldn't have had it go all the way up to the finals. I think it's just the form of magical realism didn't speak to me. Magical realism, I think, speaks to me less and less, although maybe that's changing now. I'll talk about that later in the video. Maybe I would have felt differently if I read it now versus then, although I think some of it has to do with me not having a lot of personal context with British mythology and folklore. And so it didn't, do much for me. And I mean, actually, the part I read was right before all of the text got really wonky and swirly and all that. That's where I am with that one. The one I really loved, I don't think even made it out of the Octafinals, and that was Fleischman is in Trouble, which I read before the BookTube prize. Yes, there is, it starts out with a lot of sexual salaciousness, and also I think, it starts out with something that could make Toby, the protagonist, less appealing to readers, where he's actually, having a, great time, like, his sex life is like through the roof, but he's still kind of complaining about his past or something, so, that can turn some readers off, I suppose, but from the beginning, I was really caught up in the confident voice of the narrator, just how confident she was with telling this tale. And you might be able to tell there was an Our Friend reference, so there actually is an in-person narrator who isn't Toby either, as well as, the author. Toby has more, bad stuff that's going to happen to him pretty quickly after this wake-up scene where he has to face some of the music and has more unfortunate stuff coming his way that could maybe make him a little more sympathetic. But then another thing I love about this story is it's really about the breakup of a marriage. And so first we hear Toby's side, and then we hear his ex-wife's side, and really get to understand, how complicated these issues can be about, the expectations of jobs and kids and marriage and, having a life. And what it does to both women and men, and the similarities and the differences, and just that confident voice I really loved. And to be fair, I also loved that it is a pretty Jewish book, and it did have a wonderful adaptation that I watched earlier this year that I felt like really the author was involved in the adaptation, so I felt like it really got the the vibes of the book. Yeah, that's my thoughts on the two I read. In terms of what I haven't read yet, I guess it's interesting to go back to the first two books and how music and flutes play a big part in both of them, although Red at the Bone seems a lot more realist, and it's about people jamming out in a building together, and, as far as I can tell, nothing magical is going on, but the second book, An Orchestra of Minorities, seems to be going more into folklore and mythology. I think Nigerian, because this book is taking place in Nigeria or by a Nigerian author. And then The Innocents goes straight back into realism, and after reading Fleischman is in Trouble, it's kind of quite the downer. You go from happy sex times to, burying a child and a mother in desperate circumstances. But it all seems to be sort of on the level in terms of realist fiction. And finally, book 6 is more mythological again, The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I wonder if out of all of these, at the moment, this one might interest me the most, even though it's definitely magical realist, the way that Lanny is, I suppose. But maybe it's because I'm currently reading some Jewish-inspired folklore like that, and I'm writing a Jewish fantasy novel where I'm trying to get into ideas of memory and its importance on a community and on individuals. So those words really stood out to me here in this book, and it would be curious to see what Coates did with them. And I actually would certainly be interested in an orchestra of minorities because I feel like that would give me a lot of insight into a different culture and its mythology. So I guess at the moment I am kind of leaning more speculative. It is Sci-Fi September after all, so those are kind of the books that are sticking out to me the most out of the ones I haven't read yet. So that's what I have for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these books, whether you've read them or not, what your thoughts are on the first few paragraphs. I will leave the Goodreads links for all of the books as well as the reviews for the two I've read listed down below. And that about covers it for me now. We are very quickly careening toward the end of the month, and I intend to be back on this channel imminently with my September book haul. In fact, just today I got a surprise book in the mail, so that'll be fun to talk about, as well as a couple of others, so stay tuned for that. I hope you are all having a lot of fun with what you are reading, and for my fellow current BookTube Prize judges, I hope you are finished with or very quick to finishing your readings for the finals ballots, and so we can get everything in on time, and Robert can be able to figure out the winners of this whole thing. It's all very exciting. I'll also have information to the BookTube Prize down below. Yeah, that's, I guess, about it for now. And thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.